As the coronavirus outbreak continues to decline in some states, others are seeing a rise in new infections. 20 states are now reporting an average increase in cases compared with 2 weeks ago. That includes Tulsa County, Oklahoma, which saw 89 new cases in 24 hours on Monday, the largest single-day increase since March. It's also where President Trump is set to hold his first in-person campaign rally since the pandemic began. President Trump claims there are not more cases, just better testing.
Probably the downside of having good testing is you find a lot of cases that other countries who don't even test don't have.
But experts tell CBS News that the data show that's not entirely true. The Trump campaign is mocking Joe Biden for hosting virtual events, opting to steer clear of in-person campaigning. The Biden camp says it's following the advice of experts who work for the Trump administration. On Tuesday, the former vice president's campaign held a roundtable discussion with leaders in Arizona to discuss Biden's plan for Black America. Caitlin Huey-Burns and Errin Haines join me now. Caitlin is a CBSN political reporter, and Errin is editor-at-large at The 19th. The 19th is a women-led, nonprofit, nonpartisan news organization that covers the intersection of gender, politics, and policy. Welcome to you both. Errin, before we get into that event, let's start with the messaging out of the White House about these new coronavirus cases. CBS News spoke with a computer scientist from the University of Illinois who's been looking at the data from Johns Hopkins University, and he said the number of positive cases is increasing at a rate that far exceeds any increase in testing. Talk to us about the lengths the Trump administration is going to put a different spin on this, because the reality of the numbers and the data is showing something very different.
That's exactly right. I mean, while I was doom scrolling on Twitter, something I don't advocate, by the way, but I was doom scrolling and saw somebody that said, you know, we may be done with the virus. And I do think that this is something that the president have tried to sound the alarm about, particularly Dr. Fauci. You know, we have not had an official White House briefing on about 50 days. And so that signals that they're going to move on from this and kind of reopen the country. The president has talked a lot about that, but you see local officials, mayors, governors, who are definitely concerned about what reopening is going to mean and how we can do that safely as numbers are starting to go back up. And so, you know, the president's desire to see the country kind of moving on post-pandemic is at odds with the reality on the ground in a lot of these communities and responding much more cautiously than the president for that. We know that the president, you know, was at West Point this past weekend for a graduation that was in person. It's headed to Tulsa for this rally. And, you know, even as he says, you know, that they're going to, you know, a waiver that attendees are going to have to sign saying that, you know, they will not hold the president or the campaign responsible virus as a result of coming
Errin,
out to participate in that
apologies
rally.
for interrupting here. We're having a little bit of a difficult time with your signal, so we hope it holds here. But in the meantime, let me turn to Caitlin for a moment. The Trump campaign did not respond, Caitlin, to criticisms about holding a rally in Tulsa on Juneteenth, pushing it to Saturday instead of Friday. Oklahoma is experiencing this uptick in cases. What are local officials actually saying?
Well, the mayor of Tulsa, G.T. Bynum, who is a Republican, has said that he's actually a little bit anxious about having this big rally in his own city. He said the campaign didn't reach out to him to organize this, but he said it's going to move forward. He's not going to prevent them from coming. But he said in a statement, do I wish that another area was kind of testing this out before it came to us? Yeah. So there certainly is some anxiety among some local officials there. The mayor said that the Trump campaign has agreed to comply with local protocols. So the campaign says they're going to be checking temperatures, they're going to be handing out masks even though they aren't mandatory, and they're going to be having hand sanitizer around for folks. But when you go to the state of Oklahoma's own website, when you look at the descriptions of what phase 3 reopening looks like in Oklahoma, which is the phase that they're in now, they still discourage people from meeting in big groups. And so when you hear from public health officials, they say that gathering in large groups and especially inside is really problematic, and it's giving some local local officials, even Republicans, a little bit of anxiety.
All right, and I misspoke a moment ago. I meant to say the Trump campaign did respond to those criticisms about having that rally on Juneteenth. Errin, I know you have to get going shortly, but the other story that has been dominating the headlines is this issue of structural, systemic racism and police brutality toward Black Americans. President Trump and Joe Biden have taken very different approaches when it comes to addressing those issues. Tell us about those different approaches.
Yeah, it has contrast in an election year where I think that race and racism are going to be on the ballot for many Americans. We have seen just today, the president was in the Rose Garden, flanked by law enforcement with members of family, whose family members have been slain in this country. And yet the message that he delivered today was one where he was embracing law enforcement, certainly doubling down on his support for law and that law and order kind of message that he has had throughout his presidency, but at the same time using this moment as what he sees as his record in the African American support for HBCUs, efforts to reform the criminal justice system, school choice, the unemployment numbers. This is what he's talking about, in the midst of a national reckoning on race, not on attacking the police, but an attack on bad policing, which is really what these protests are about. And so, contrast that to took this opportunity to push back against the president's assertion that the Obama-Biden administration did anything policing, when we know that administration did, in fact, have a 21st century task force on policing, started several pattern and practice investigations with police departments, both of which were kind of dismantled under the Trump administration. And so, what you see Joe Biden doing, talking about the need for attending, services for George Floyd's family down in Houston, just continuing to talk about systemic racism. I mean, that was the catalyst to his entire campaign, saying that this election is about a battle for the soul of America, and saying that, we need to be asking ourselves as a country, is we, and I think that that's a very different message than we're hearing from President Trump.
All right, Errin Haines, editor-at-large at the 19th. Thank you so much. Let's continue this conversation. Caitlin, let me ask you about some polls. There have been several head-to-head polls out in recent weeks, including a couple out today. And it's important to note that polls are a snapshot in time. However, do you see any signs that point to perhaps a shifting electoral map?
Well, I think one poll that came out yesterday that raised a lot of eyebrows was a poll out of Iowa from the Des Moines Register showing Trump with just a 1-point lead in that state where he won in 2016 by 9 points. And a poll a couple of days before showed Republican Senator, the incumbent Joni Ernst, who's running for re-election this year, down 3 points. So we saw Vice President Pence go to Iowa today. That kind of poll should raise some alarm bells within the campaign because this is a state that Trump won overwhelmingly in 2016. Now, you are right to recognize or to note that polls are a snapshot in time. If you go back 4 years ago, around this same time, the average showed Hillary Clinton up about 4 points in Iowa at that time, and we know what happened there. But given that this is a state that the president has gone to a lot throughout the course of his presidency, a state that flipped overwhelmingly to support him in 2016, and a state that has about 30 counties that flipped from Obama to Trump in 2016, the most out of any state, should raise some alarm bells for the campaign at this stage. You also saw a poll out of Michigan showing Biden up about 15 points. Now, nobody that I talked to thinks that this is going to be a 15-point race anywhere, that this is still a partisan election and that the race will be very close. But in a state like like Michigan, in a state like Iowa, when Democrats are trying to figure out how to win back the Midwest, they are seeing some opportunities to gain some ground, especially with the pandemic in the background. These are two states that have been hard hit by the pandemic, especially when you look at Iowa, and the impact on pork production has really been in the headlines as well. And Michigan, as we know, has had a really difficult time with the pandemic. So those could be playing factors, but it was notable for the vice president to go to Iowa today, and we'll see if the president finds his way there on the campaign trail as well.
All right, CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns. Caitlin, great to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you.